Michelle is the CEO of the Housing Trust, and she was elected chair of the Community Housing Industry Association of New South Wales last December. Our Housing Trust, it's a charitable social enterprise with a portfolio of 1,200 properties across the Illawarra. They provide around 2,500 people on low to moderate incomes with a safe, secure and affordable home. As chair of the industry peak body, Michelle represents 130 not-for-profit community housing providers, or CHPs, as you'll hear, to all levels of government and industry. Michelle is a highly regarded and popular commentator on the complex issues affecting residential housing, employment and economic growth, and she uses her positions to advocate for people living and working in the Illawarra and nationally. Just this week, Michelle shared her very personal story of twice having to struggle to survive and keep a roof over her head when she was recognised by the Illawarra business community as the Outstanding Business Leader for 2021. That happened at last Friday's Business Illawarra Awards. Michelle, congratulations on that award, and we're looking forward to your presentation this afternoon.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you, everybody. Can I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and First Nations people who are joining us this afternoon. Many of you will have seen that one of the first things that we did as a part of our Homes for Local Heroes campaigns was assess each of our 4 councils. The Housing Trust predominantly works here in the Illawarra. The vast majority of our homes are spread across the Wollongong, Shellharbour and Kiama council areas, although we do have a number in the Shoalhaven, mainly around the north end at Nowra and Bomaderry. And so what we did was assess each of the 4 councils and said, okay, where are they at in relation to what they are doing? As you just saw in Michael's presentation, and I'll speak to more of that again, there are these 5 basic areas that every council can and should be addressing by way of making a contribution to affordable rental housing. The first is in relation to their policies and plans. Wollongong City Council has been working on their housing plan and strategy for at least 7 or 8 years. So we said, okay, tick, it's in progress, but there is a higher level of urgency than council perhaps seems to acknowledge in relation to how quickly that document's being finalised. Shellharbour Council has a plan and a policy, so that's a start, but it does absolutely nothing by way of actually addressing the practical mechanisms that are available to council to actually make a difference in that area. You perhaps saw that regrettably Kiama Council has nothing at all. And in fact, their official statement is that words to the effect of those people can just live somewhere else and move somewhere else. Not only is that factually incorrect, because there's nowhere virtually affordable to rent anywhere across our communities. So not only is there nowhere for anybody to actually find a vacancy, but it is inappropriate. And they then continue to say that those people can live somewhere else and we don't have to deal, quote, with the social impact. It is a credit to the majority of Kiama Council candidates that in response to that scorecard and that realisation that they have come out and said, this really isn't good enough, and help us and work with us to be able to make a difference. Shoalhaven Council, in contrast to the other 3, doing some great things. They've had a really good policy and plan in place now for a couple of years. They've done a wonderful joint venture that's about to get to development application stage with one of our community housing colleagues, and they will be progressing that on council land. And they are also looking at mandating council, rather developer contributions. After we announced our scorecard, we got what I like to call a whole lot of comments, some of them very public, which is fair enough. And in the consultations and the conversations that we've had more recently with the council candidates, we got lots of myths, furphies and distractions, I've got to say. The first and the most common one was, there's nothing we can do. Well, sorry, that's just factually incorrect. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. And lots of councils, of course, including very locally with Shoalhaven, have been doing it for quite a few years. So let's dispel that. It's not up to us as council. It's a state or a federal government issue. Most certainly, state and federal governments do have to make a contribution. But sorry, candidates, sorry, returning councillors, it's actually a requirement in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. At law, your council actually has an obligation to do something about this. We've opened up lots more land for development. Well, that's good, except when land is opened up, the vast majority of it is for home purchase. It's not doing anything to make a direct contribution to the real crisis, which is in rental affordability. And again, as we've just heard, over the last 10 years, we've never had more homes built and they've never been more expensive. So simply opening up land release is not enough. Council doesn't have a plan, true, but we are doing things. Not good enough. Developers won't invest here if we require a contribution. Contributions are already required, and more importantly still, for those councils that have been working in this space and being very proactive and productive and strategic for a number of years, there's been no decline and no deterioration in the amount of development that's happening in their local government areas. Smaller and different building designs will make them affordable. That's not necessarily the case. As I had in conversation with one particular well-known councillor in Wollongong, I said, just because it's a one-bedroom unit on Cliff Drive doesn't mean it's going to be affordable rental. So, you know, let's have a bit of a reality check about that. And the other one that actually came up during our briefings in the last couple of weeks with the candidates was, why should the community pay? Well, of course, the community is paid to contribute to marinas in Shoal Harbour, but not everybody has a boat. There's lots of cycle paths in Wollongong now, but not everybody rides a push bike. There's lots of parks that are available broadly to the community, but not everybody plays in them all the time. And so, of course, there is a contribution. And most importantly, if we want to have healthy, productive workforces, we've heard in our briefings as well that people like Warrigal Care and IRT and lots of other really, really wonderful, important organisations in our communities are actually unable to hire staff. And as a direct consequence of that, they're starting to actually close services, and that's horrendous. So this matters to everybody, not just to the people that are looking to rent. So these are the 5 areas. And I just want to quite briefly just run through the sorts of things, though, again, really factually, to be able to demonstrate why, and we hope that you do, ask your local candidates, ask your mayoral candidates 2 different questions, perhaps. If they're asking for your vote to be re-elected, how do I know that you're going to do anything any different to what you've been doing for the last 4 years? That's a question for the candidates wanting re-election. And for the new ones, what's your plan to actually make a positive contribution moving forward? So I just want to just run through a couple of these things. So this is, I'm certainly not going to go into it, the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. These are direct takes from the law. The Act is the law in New South Wales. Local government councils have a role and a statutory responsibility. And the words are to preserve, so not go backwards, to preserve and to create affordable housing. It's defined as a public purpose, just indeed are parks and cycleways and other good investments. There's a whole range of definitions and benchmarks that provide real rules and regulations for council about what they can and can't do. And there are very specific provisions in the Act that relate to it. So here are some examples. I will make all of this information available to you after the session today. I don't need you to read them all, but the one I would like to just draw your attention to is Willoughby Council. So these are all examples of plans and policy positions that have been in place for quite a number of years of other councils. So as I just said, those candidates that say there's nothing we can do, it's not our problem. Sorry. What's the ABC call it? A fact checker. So Willoughby Council, I particularly love their purpose. It says to increase affordable rental housing. So here it is, straight up front, the importance of the word rental for people on moderate incomes and essential workers in order to maintain a livable and prosperous city. Again, these other more colourful examples, the other four, City of Sydney there, North Sydney, Ryde, Tamworth, these are actually all taken from a New South Wales government toolkit that's actually been written for councils to actually give them a roadmap on how to actually do this. There are 6 modules. It's freely available. You just download it from the net and get on with it. It's really straightforward. The other thing that we said in the scorecard was that councils need to set targets. As you can see here, Willoughby Council says they're going to increase their requirement over the next couple of years from 4 to 7%. It is already at 4%. And then by 2026, from 7 to 10%. Ryde Council, by 2031, 5% of all new dwellings there will be affordable rental. Cumberland Council takes an appropriately nuanced approach. So they're saying in the central district of Cumberland Council, and that's Auburn, just to the edge of Parramatta in Western Sydney, they're saying in the real central district area, 5 to 10% of all new dwellings will be affordable rental, but further out of the immediate city locations, 15%. The reality is, and you may have heard the Housing Trust calling for it, to actually make a difference, 1 in 5 homes, or 20%, should be across our community affordable rental. So here again from the toolkit, as far as using land is concerned and policies with land, at the moment, the vast majority of our councils, with the exception of Shoalhaven, their attitude is if we've got surplus land, we'll sell it to the highest bidder. We don't think that that's good enough. And again, you saw some examples there of where absolutely there should be transparent tendering, perhaps even competitive relationships or opportunities for organisations like us to be able to bid for land. But we believe very strongly that it should be only made available for not-for-profit or for charitable organisations, and it should be made available for this public benefit of increasing the amount of affordable rental housing. It should simply not be sold off to the highest bidder, which is almost inevitably going to be a private property developer with no community benefit. Please, again, don't misunderstand me. We must work. The only way that we can solve this problem is if all 3 levels of government and private enterprise and the community organisations come together and work together. But we need a commitment from councils, and we need them to prioritise really what do you want about here. And under the Act, and certainly from our perspective, it needs to be about public benefit. There are some direct dealing, that's the language around it, that are examples, and that Shoalhaven Council example is a gift in a joint venture arrangement worth $1.7 million of land to allow Southern Cross to actually build more housing. Just as an example, one of the things that councils could immediately do, in fact, each of the development applications that the Housing Trust has initiated in the last few years. One in Eager Street, Wollongong, we applied to have our $21,000 worth of development application fees waived by Wollongong Council. They said no, no explanation. They just said no. Shell Harbour Council said exactly the same thing. So that's something they could change straight away. very significant contributions. Robert Street Corrimal, that's our latest development. Now, in absolute fairness, and I want to be completely transparent here, Wollongong Council were expecting that a lot of that development was going to be market housing, so fair enough. But in total, there was just under $100,000 worth of total fees charged there. Our Housing Trust newest development is going to be in Dudley Street, just behind the Wollongong Hospital car park. At the moment, there's an expectation that as a charitable organisation, that our developer contribution is going to be $90,000. Again, Wollongong Council has an immediate opportunity when I ask them to waive that fee to do so. There is actually a form. All the councils actually have forms. They just say no when we submit them. And finally, developer contribution schemes. I won't go into that. The SEP there, the SEPP, is part of the planning regulation and law. It stands for the State Environmental Policy. Again, there are a whole range of these that our councils could have been doing for many, many years to create seniors housing and housing for people living with disabilities, the affordable rental housing. There's a whole range of them. There are special contribution and infrastructure schemes. But one of the main ones at the moment is a voluntary planning arrangement, and they are in place and they are used somewhat by our councils. And that's where a developer is required to contribute land or contribute some housing, dedicate their land free of cost, perhaps pay a monetary contribution. So there are a whole range of things there that our councils can do. And we ask you to ask your candidates and to think about those things as you go about considering who's going to get your vote. And be assured that we will continue to watch and encourage councils to be really proactive in this space for everybody's benefit.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We've got a question from Jackie. I might ask it on Jackie's behalf. Our housing crisis is a complex and nuanced issue. Too true. The housing crisis is a global crisis. We are in a crisis due to ineffective and outdated state and federal housing policy, tax policy and economic policy, and global influences. Local government has historically had limited capacity and levers to pull. Is shaming local government fair? And she says, housing has shifted from shelter to investment.
I agree with almost everything you've just said, Jackie, and thank you for the question. Yes, it is global. Yes, it is hard. However, I think what I've already demonstrated is that local councils can, must, should, and are already making a contribution, and we expect them to continue to do that. Use of the word shaming, trust me, nobody felt more uncomfortable and disappointed about publishing that scorecard than I did, that we did. And yet the reality is, before we can solve a problem, we have to honestly stand and look at it, understand it, name it, embrace it, and then only together can we solve it. And again, yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Every level of government and private enterprise have got to make a contribution. And I absolutely believe that when we come together with the intent of making a positive difference, this problem is solvable. We can make an immediate difference.
I think we've got another quick question, Michelle. It's a long one. How can we increase the supply of family-friendly, affordable and secure 3-bedroom accommodation for key workers? Having 2 or more children in 2-bedroom apartments makes it difficult. The market produces less of these.
I totally agree. The new development that we've just opened in Corrimal, in fact, has 13 4-bedroom townhouses in it, specifically for these families. You are absolutely right. You know, most of us were lucky enough to grow up in a backyard, if not big enough to kick a ball around, at least, you know, big enough to have a proper clothesline. And families do want and need space. And regrettably, it's the cost of land more than anything else that requires us to go up. And therefore to create higher density through building units. Unfortunately, that's That's the mechanics of the cost structure. However, again, to your very point, albeit perhaps indirectly, that's where when local councils, state government, or the federal government have land, by making that land available, it is without question the biggest contribution that they can make. As community housing providers, largely we're able to borrow money under our own steam, but being able to do that in partnership off the back of having land is a huge initial contribution.